Today I'm preparing cherry almond scones, a really easy item utilizing self-rising flour. Now, self-rising flour is basically all-purpose flour that has had baking powder along with a little bit of salt added to it. So if it's something you don't normally use on a regular basis and there's a recipe you want to prepare calling for it, you can make your own homemade substitution. For every 1 cup of self-rising flour, you'll use 1 cup of all-purpose flour plus 1 teaspoon of baking powder and a small pinch of salt, and that will do the trick for you. So for this item, what we have 2.5 cups of self-rising flour in our bowl here. To that, we're going to add in our sugar, about 3 tablespoons. And then we have a 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon and a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Now, quick breads often utilize the technique we're using today, which is the 2-bowl mixing method, sometimes referred to as the muffin method. And that's where we mix our dry ingredients in one bowl and our liquid ingredients in another bowl. The purpose for that is to prevent overmixing and therefore development of the gluten, which is what gives structure and strength to baked goods, but not typically something you want in muffins and biscuits where tenderness is desired. So by minimizing our mixing once we get liquid in there, we're going to have a more tender result. So by thoroughly combining our dry ingredients, we can make sure that those are completely blended together. And to this, we now add 4 tablespoons of cold butter. And that is important because we want our fat to be in distinct kind of pea-sized corn kernel bits. And so for that purpose, I like to just rub that in with my fingertips. Obviously, it's a little bit more difficult if you're doing this in a really large batch, but in smaller quantities, fingertips I find work better simply because of the fact you can really feel what's going on. If you use a pastry blender or something larger from a utensil standpoint, you literally lose touch with what's going on and you tend to rub it into particles that are too fine. The reason why that's important is if we don't have distinct particles of solid fat in our scones, or you could liken this to biscuits as well, you're not going to have a flaky texture. Flakiness comes from having distinct particles of fat that are separating those strands of gluten. And as that fat melts, it leaves behind open nooks and crannies and pockets, which help to give us the flaky results that we're looking for. If you get this too fine, we end up with a mealy dough, and that's one where they just kind of crumble apart and break. They're going to be tender, but they're not going to have a flakiness to them. So once the fat is cut in there, kind of into, as I said, corn kernel sized bits, we're going to set that aside, and now we move on to our liquid ingredients. For the liquid ingredients, what we have here, we're going to use 1 egg. Typically you want to have these at room temperature, but in this case, since our fat is cold, an ice cold egg is actually going to be beneficial because it's going to help keep that fat nice and firm so it doesn't soften up. So ice cold, room temperature, either one will work. And to this, we're going to add 1 cup of heavy cream. Heavy cream rather than milk because that has more fat, therefore it's going to provide us more tenderness. And then a 1/2 teaspoon of pure vanilla extract. Go with the pure imitation. It's a lot less expensive, doesn't have nearly the flavor. And we're going to beat that up. Once we get this beaten up, we're going to incorporate 1 15-ounce can of tart sour cherries that have been drained and coarsely chopped. And that would be equivalent to about 1 cup if you have them in a can larger than 15 ounces. So we're going to put those in there. Some of that juice, while these were originally drained, that's the juice that has seeped out of those after those were cut. So that juice is okay, but the juice they're packed in, we do want to get rid of. Otherwise, our dough is too sticky. Once that's mixed, we're going to move back to our dry ingredients. And now we make a well in the center. The purpose for this is to create space for our liquid ingredients so that we don't overmix. By pouring in our liquid ingredients into the center, we're going to be able to just fold that together only until it's moistened. Therefore, we minimize the chance of developing the gluten. So we're just going to scrunch that down or scooch it, both of those technical culinary terms you technically should go to culinary school to learn how to do, but I think you can do it on your own. So we're just going to gently fold this now, which means I'm just scraping around and periodically cutting through the middle, gently folding that until our mixture is moistened. Now, a lot of scone recipes will have you turn them out onto a floured surface and turn them over a few times. That's to help strengthen them and develop the gluten. This one, when I created the recipe, I wanted to make it a little bit easier, so it was kind of a mix and bake type recipe, and therefore we're simply going to scoop these out onto a parchment lined pan using an ice cream scoop to make it a little bit easier. So these are going to be round rather than square or triangular. But this is the texture that we're looking for. It should just be kind of a solid dough, not real sticky, nor should it be super stiff either. Now, to bake these, we're going to take our parchment lined pan so we don't have to worry about getting these off later on. And we're just going to use whatever size scoop you want. It's going to be dependent upon how many items you're serving. If you're going to serve other bread items, then I'd recommend going with a smaller size scoop. If this is the only item, or perhaps you're just having guests over for coffee and baked goods, then you might want to do them a little bit larger, and that's totally up to you. Baking time will vary slightly, but it's probably going to be within 5 minutes either way of the standard time in the recipe. So once we have those scooped out, we do want to give those a little bit of room to spread because of the butter in there. They will spread out a bit. And these are going to go into the oven, and then they're going to bake for about 25 minutes. Once the scones come out of the oven and they've cooled, they're going to look like this. So they're not going to be real puffy. They will spread a little bit. These are now ready for glazing. For the glaze, to finish these off, we're going to use some powdered sugar. We have about 1.5 cups of powdered sugar. To this, we're going to add in a couple tablespoons of milk. We'll leave a little bit out just in case we don't need all of that. We have 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla extract. And then we're going to add 1 teaspoon of pure almond extract. Again, the real thing, a little bit left in there, we're just going to drop that in too. And then we're going to beat that up. Now this should be a fairly thick consistency because we want to be able to coat that, but we don't want it to just run straight off. So you can adjust it accordingly. If you want it a little thicker, use a little less milk or more powdered sugar. And that's about the consistency that we want. So once we have that mixed, we can bring that here. We're just going to drizzle that. You can zigzag, you can go in a circular motion, you could use a spoon and you could just spoon it right into the middle and let it coat evenly. I just kind of like to do a random zigzag for the appearance of it. And it will ooze a little bit, so you don't have to worry about getting that real evenly coated because it's going to run for a bit first. Once these are drizzled, then we have some toasted sliced almonds. You could also use slivered almonds if you prefer. Either one works. For toasting them, sometimes I'll see recipes that call and people that will suggest toasting them on the stovetop in a saute pan. I'm not a big fan of that method because of the fact that the only part that toasts is the portion in contact with the pan. I instead prefer to do them on a parchment lined sheet pan in the oven. About 350 degrees for 8 to 10 minutes will typically do the job. They're going to toast more evenly because you have the hot air surrounding it, and provided that you don't overcook them, they're going to come out nice and evenly brown. So these have already been toasted. We're going to scatter those over the top and then just let that glaze set up a bit. And again, these can be done earlier in the day if you're going to be serving these in the afternoon with some coffee, or if you're doing these for brunch, I'd recommend do these the night before so that they're all set to go in the morning and you have one less thing to worry about. So there you have it, cherry almond scones.